Have you ever wondered why Vikings chose monasteries as their primary targets during raids? Most people think these raids were simply about looting and pillaging, but the reality is much more complex. In this video, we will uncover the surprising reasons behind these brutal attacks, which go beyond just seeking treasure. Get ready for shocking insights, untold stories, and a deeper understanding of Viking motivations. What if I told you that the Vikings were not just mindless marauders? The Viking Age began around 793 AD and marked a period of exploration and expansion for Norse seafarers. During this time, Europe was in a weakened state, with kingdoms struggling to defend their territories. Monasteries, rich in resources and often poorly defended, became prime targets for Viking raids. You see, these religious sites were not only places of worship, but also repositories of wealth. They held valuable items like gold, silver, and religious artifacts. In a time when most of Europe was embroiled in conflict and instability, the monasteries stood out as opulent sanctuaries filled with treasures. But Vikings were more than just raiders. They were traders and settlers who sought new opportunities. While the image of a Viking often conjures up thoughts of chaos and violence, the reality is that they were also strategic thinkers. They recognized that monasteries provided access to wealth and goods that could be beneficial for their society. This realization set the stage for their relentless pursuit of these sites. As the Viking raids began, many saw them as brutal assaults driven by greed. However, understanding the historical context reveals a more layered narrative. The geopolitical landscape of Europe during this time was fraught with divisions, making monasteries particularly appealing. With kings too busy fighting one another to focus on defending these vulnerable locations, the Vikings seized the opportunity. In essence, the Viking raids on monasteries were not merely acts of violence. They were strategic decisions shaped by the conditions of the time. As we delve deeper into this topic, we will discover that there was much more at stake than gold and silver. The cultural exchanges that occurred and the consequences of these raids would leave a lasting impact on European history, altering perceptions of the Vikings from mere raiders to influential players in medieval society. Why did monasteries hold such appeal for Viking raiders? To answer this, we need to understand the significance of these religious sites during the Middle Ages. Monasteries were not just places of worship, they were repositories of immense wealth. Within their walls lay gold, silver, and precious religious artifacts, making them incredibly tempting targets. Most people think Vikings attacked simply for riches, but there's much more to this story. These religious sites were also centers of learning and culture. Monks were the keepers of knowledge, and monasteries attracted trade and wealth, which made them bustling hubs in an otherwise chaotic landscape. But while they held so much value, monasteries were often isolated and lacked military protection. This combination of wealth and vulnerability was a magnet for Viking raiders. The sun rises over a secluded monastery, its peaceful atmosphere contrasting sharply with the looming threat of Viking ships gliding silently across the water. The monks, engrossed in their daily prayers, are unaware that their sanctuary is about to be breached. The Vikings saw these monasteries not merely as targets for plunder, but as gateways to the wealth of Christian Europe. They recognized that these sites held more than just religious significance. They were treasure troves filled with valuables ripe for the taking. What's fascinating is that Vikings were not only focused on pillaging, they viewed these monasteries as opportunities to gain access to the riches that could fuel their expeditions and help establish their own settlements. This perspective is crucial in understanding why monasteries became primary targets. The wealth obtained from these raids allowed Viking society to flourish, leading to the establishment of trade routes and connections across Europe. This story of monasteries as gold mines reveals a deeper layer of Viking strategy. It was not just about brute force, it was about intelligence and opportunism. The raids reflected a calculated approach to survival and prosperity, showcasing the Vikings as more than just violent invaders. As we explore this further, we will uncover the intricacies of these raids and the lasting impact they had on both Viking culture and the societies they encountered. What role did religious differences play in Viking raids? To truly grasp the significance, we need to delve into the stark contrast between Viking beliefs and those of the Christian monks they targeted. Most people think these raids were purely about plunder, but they also represented a profound cultural clash. Vikings practiced Norse paganism, which celebrated a pantheon of gods and nature, contrasting sharply with the monastic Christian faith that prioritized peace, forgiveness, and devotion. This divergence created an intense ideological conflict. When Vikings raided monasteries, it was not just an attack on wealth, it was a symbolic rejection of Christian authority. They sought to assert their dominance and demonstrate their power by attacking sacred sites that represented the very fabric of Christian society. Imagine the chilling moment when Viking longships appeared on the horizon, their sleek forms cutting through the waters. The monks, devoted to their quiet lives of prayer and learning, could hardly fathom the brutality that was about to unfold. The attack was not just physical, it was a psychological warfare that conveyed a powerful message. Raiding these sacred places was an act of defiance against a faith that sought to dominate Europe. The irony lies in the fact that monks, often seen as peaceful and passive, became victims in this brutal conflict. They dedicated their lives to spirituality and education, yet found themselves facing armed raiders who disregarded their values. As the Vikings stormed in, their beliefs clashed violently with those of the monks. In a sense, these raids were a gruesome reminder reminder of the harsh realities of their world, where ideology could lead to violence and destruction. This cultural conflict adds depth to our understanding of Viking raids. They were not merely driven by greed, but were also influenced by a desire to assert their identity and belief. The Vikings used these raids to send a message, reinforcing their cultural values while undermining those of their enemies. This complex interplay of faith and conflict shaped not just the Vikings, but also the history of medieval Europe as a whole. By understanding these motivations, we gain a richer perspective on the Vikings as more than just warriors. They were key players in the broader narrative of cultural change in the face of differing ideologies. How did these raids shape Viking culture and society? To grasp the full impact of these raids, we must look beyond the plunder and examine the profound changes they instigated within Viking communities. Many people think Viking raids were purely about stealing gold and silver, but the reality is far more complex. Successful raids were instrumental in funding Viking expeditions across Europe. Imagine a Viking longship laden with treasures and valuable goods returning home. This influx of wealth didn't just fill the coffers, it sparked a transformation within Viking society. Treasures taken from monasteries, gold, silver, and religious artifacts were more than just material wealth. They became the fuel for future ventures, enabling further exploration and settlement. As wealth flowed in, so did the development of social and political structures within Viking communities. With newfound riches, chieftains gained power, and the fabric of Viking society began to change. Leaders who could successfully raid and bring back treasure rose in status, influencing the hierarchy of Viking culture. This shift turned many raiders into traders and settlers, expanding their reach into new territories, from the British Isles to the Mediterranean. But what about the identity of the Vikings themselves? This transition from raiders to traders marked a significant evolution. It challenged the perception of Vikings as mere pillagers, showing them instead as shrewd opportunists adapting to changing circumstances. They weren't just attacking, they were integrating, trading, and establishing connections with other cultures. As they settled in new lands, they absorbed ideas and practices from the societies around them, blending their rich Norse heritage with those of others. These raids left a lasting legacy, shaping relationships between Vikings and European societies. While they initially struck fear in the hearts of many, the eventual interactions between Vikings and the people they encountered led to cultural exchanges that profoundly influenced medieval Europe. This complex tapestry of conflict, integration, and adaptation tells a story of a civilization in flux, one that was not merely defined by its violent past, but also by its capacity for growth and change. By understanding the impact of these raids, we can appreciate the Vikings as pivotal figures in shaping the historical landscape of Europe, showcasing their journey from brutal raiders to influential traders and settlers. Their legacy is a reminder of how conflict can lead to transformation, redefining identities, and fostering connections across cultures. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer understanding of why Viking raids on monasteries were not simply acts of wanton destruction or mindless greed. Instead, these brutal attacks were rooted in complex motivations that reflect the cultural and historical dynamics of the time. Most people think Vikings were just raiders, driven by the desire for gold and glory. However, the reality is that these raids had far-reaching implications that shaped not only Viking society, but also the landscape of medieval Europe. As we've explored, the raids served as a catalyst for transformation within Viking communities. The wealth gained from these assaults funded expeditions, allowing Norse seafarers to explore and settle in new lands. You learned that the raids also led to the establishment of social and political structures in Viking society. Vikings who successfully orchestrated these raids rose in status and power, creating a hierarchy that influenced their culture. This shift in identity was crucial. As Vikings transitioned from mere raiders to traders and settlers, their impact on Europe deepened significantly. But what about the monasteries themselves? These once sacred spaces became symbols of the conflict between two vastly different cultures. As centers of learning and culture, monasteries were repositories of wealth, attracting goods and resources. Yet they were also vulnerable due to their isolation. This paradox of being both valuable and defenseless made them prime targets for Viking raids, which were motivated by a mix of opportunity and cultural conflict. Reflecting on this history, it becomes evident that Viking raids were not merely violent acts, but strategic maneuvers that altered the course of history. They played a significant role in shaping relationships between Vikings and European societies, fostering a legacy that resonates even today. In conclusion, you've discovered that Viking raids on monasteries reveal a tapestry of motivations that go far beyond the simple pursuit of treasure. By understanding these complexities, we can appreciate the Vikings as shrewd strategists and pivotal figures in the development of medieval Europe. So, the next time you think of Vikings, remember, they were not just warriors, they were agents of change in a transforming world. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.